Step outside barefoot in January, onto frozen ground. Count the seconds before it stops being uncomfortable and starts being frightening. For most of human history, that was simply what winter felt like.
Not one shoe survives from the Ice Age, not a fragment. Leather, bark, grass, sinew, everything a shoe is made of rots away within a few centuries.
And yet archaeologists are fairly confident people were wearing them tens of thousands of years ago.
The evidence isn't a shoe, it's a change in the small bones of the toes.
The oldest complete shoe we have came out of a cave called Areni 1 in southern Armenia in 2008. One leather moccasin cut from a single piece of cowhide, stuffed with grass.
It's about a modern women's size 7.
It survived because the cave floor was sealed under thick layers of sheep dung, which kept everything cool and dry. Roughly 5,500 years old.
Go older and you get sandals, not shoes.
Fort Rock Cave in Oregon, dug by Luther Cressman in 1938. Dozens of sandals, twisted from sagebrush bark, around 10,000 years old.
10,000 years sounds deep. It isn't.
By then, people had already lived through the coldest part of the last ice age, in Siberia and glacial Europe.
Everything soft from that world is gone.
We have stone tools, bone points, ivory beads, ash, and teeth. Clothing survives mostly as an absence.
So if you want to know when people started covering their feet, you have to stop looking for shoes. You have to look at the feet themselves.
Bone is living tissue, and it is lazy in a useful way. Load it repeatedly and it thickens. Stop loading it and it quietly thins out to save material.
Walk barefoot on rough ground, and your toes do real work. They splay, grip, feel for the surface, push off. The small toes take a genuine share of that load.
Put a stiff sole underneath, and the sole does the gripping instead.
The foot flexes less. The small toes still move, but they stop being structural.
That difference shows up in the skeleton.
In populations that grew up barefoot, the toe bones, specifically the phalanges of toes 2 through 5, are visibly thicker walled. The big toe is the exception. It carries load either way, shod or not, so it barely changes. The signal lives almost entirely in the 4 little toes. In 2005, Erik at Washington University in St. Louis published a paper in the Journal of Archaeological Science asking one simple question: when do fossil little toes get thin? He measured toe bones across Neanderthals, early modern humans, and later Ice Age Europeans. The older groups have strong, thick, lesser toes. The barefoot pattern, unmistakably. Then, somewhere in the middle of the Upper Paleolithic, very roughly 26,000 to 30,000 years ago, the lesser toes thin out. They start looking like ours. The clever part is the control. If Ice Age people were simply becoming lighter built overall, everything would thin at once, and the argument collapses. It doesn't. In the same skeletons, the leg bones stay powerfully built, thick femurs and shin bones, the legs of people walking enormous distances. Only the toes get delicate. That's the pattern you'd expect from footwear with a real sole. The legs still work hard. The toes have been retired from load bearing by something wrapped around them. Then the date moved. In 2008, Trinkas and Hongshang published on a skeleton from Tianyuan Cave near Zhoukoudian outside Beijing. Tianyuan 1 is roughly 40,000 years old, one of the earliest modern humans known from East Asia. And its lesser toe bones were already slender. That's where the 40,000-year figure comes from. Not a shoe, not a footprint. A handful of small bones from one man's foot in a Chinese cave. Which is exactly why the date is contested. Fossil feet are rare. Complete ones are rarer. For some periods, the entire sample is a few individuals. One unusual person can move a whole trend line. Trinkas is careful about this himself. The argument rests on a pattern, not a proof. There's a second objection, and to me, it's the serious one. These bones can only detect footwear stiff enough to take real load off the toes. A hide wrapped around the foot and tied at the ankle would keep you warm and leave no skeletal trace at all. The toes would still be doing all the work.
So the honest version is this.
About 40,000 years ago, give or take, some people were wearing sturdy shoes. Soft foot coverings could be far, far older. How much older, nobody can say. Neanderthals lived through European winters for well over 100,000 years. It is very hard to believe they walked into snow with bare feet. Nathan Wales modeled Ice Age clothing coverage in 2012 and found that hands and feet are exactly where the estimates diverge most. That gap is where the argument still sits.
Set the dating aside and ask the better question.
Barefoot feet aren't fragile at all. So why would anyone go to the trouble of making shoes? Not for cushioning. A 2019 study from Daniel Lieberman's lab at Harvard found habitually barefoot people grow thick callus that protects the foot without dulling their sense of the ground.
So the reason isn't comfort. It's cold and it's cutting.
Feet are extremities, and in cold air the body narrows the blood vessels there first to protect the core. That's what makes toes go numb, then white, then dead. Frostbite doesn't need Arctic temperatures. Wet feet just above freezing for long enough will do it.
And a damaged foot in a foraging camp isn't an inconvenience.
It's a person who can't follow the herd, can't fetch water, can't carry a child.
Hunter-gatherers walk.
Studies of the Hadza in Tanzania put daily travel at several miles, every single day, for decades. Now multiply that by ice, scree, and frozen stubble. Shoes don't only prevent injury there, they extend range. They let you leave camp on a morning you'd otherwise have stayed in, and that is a different life. So who in a camp got covered feet first? The most suggestive evidence is a site called Sungir near Vladimir in Russia, excavated by Otto Bader from the mid-1950s, about 34,000 years old. Several burials, covered in thousands of beads carved from mammoth ivory, sewn onto clothing that has long since disappeared. The beads kept their arrangement. Rows of them run down the legs and stop in bands across the feet, in a pattern most archaeologists read as decorated footwear. Two of the Sungir burials are children, and their foot beating is as elaborate as the adults. That's genuinely striking, but it isn't daily life. People are dressed for burial. What someone wears into a grave, covered in thousands of hand-drilled beads, tells you about ceremony as much as about a Tuesday morning. If I had to guess, and it is a guess, foot covering spread fast once it existed. Anything that removes a daily pain usually does. The most exposed would want it first. Whoever ranged farthest, whoever was oldest, whoever had already lost toes one winter. But the archaeology cannot tell us that. What we're actually watching in those thin toe bones isn't the invention of the shoe. It's the moment shoes stopped being occasional and became the default. That's the real threshold. Not the first pair, but the first generation that grew up in them, whose feet formed around the assumption of a sole underneath. Take off a shoe tonight and look at your two smallest toes. Weak, slightly crooked, barely load-bearing. That's not a flaw. That's an Ice Age decision, still visible in you.